The rope bit into Ilara's neck, rough as a judgment already passed. Dawn was a smear of blood on the horizon, the last she was meant to see. Below the hastily constructed gallows, the town of Redemption huddled, a clot of dark figures eager for the spectacle, their faces pale and indistinct in the pre-dawn chill. Murmurs crawled like snakes through the silence, whispers of a murderess, thief, words that had sealed her fate. She closed her eyes, not against the sight of them, but against the finality of the rising sun. Each breath was a shard of ice in her lungs. There was no justice here, only the stark, unyielding wood of the platform and the tightening knot of fear in her belly. The preacher had finished his dreary monotone, his words about absolution falling on deaf ears, hers most of all. She had pleaded, she had wept, she had screamed her innocence until her throat was raw, but redemption had wanted a sacrifice, and she was it. The sheriff, a man whose jowls quivered with self-importance, cleared his throat, his voice booming unnaturally in the fragile morning air. Ilara Vance, for the crime of murder and theft, you have been sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. May God have mercy on your soul. He reached for the lever. A single shot cracked the dawn, impossibly loud, splintering the silence into 1,000 jagged pieces. The sheriff yelped, clutching his hand where the lever had been, a fresh gouge in the wood beside his fingers. Head snapped towards the end of the dusty main street. A figure on horseback, silhouetted against the bloody sunrise, emerged from the morning mist like an apparition. Tall, broad-shouldered, a long duster coat billowing around him, he moved with a lethal grace that stilled the crowd's outrage before it could fully form. He didn't hurry, yet every line of him spoke of coiled deadliness. As he drew closer, details sharpened the weathered face, eyes like chips of winter sky, a gun belt slung low, the worn leather of his chaps. His horse, a powerful black, snorted plumes of steam into the cold air. Recognition, then fear, rippled through the onlookers. "It's Cale," a voice rasped, a name spoken like a curse and a prayer. The feared gunslinger. Cale. Even she, in her isolated terror, had heard whispers of him, a man who dealt in death as easily as other men dealt in coin, a ghost of the Badlands. Cale reined in his horse a few feet from the gallows, his gaze sweeping over the scene with an unnerving calm. It lingered on Ilara, a look so intense it felt like a physical touch, stripping away her fear for a bare second, replacing it with a bewildered spark of something else. Then, his eyes, cold and hard, fixed on the sheriff. His voice, when it came, was low, a gravelly rumble that carried despite its softness. "There's been a mistake." The sheriff, emboldened slightly by the men around him reaching for their own weapons, puffed himself up. "No mistake, Cale. This woman is a condemned criminal. Justice is being served." Cale's hand rested near the butt of his pistol, a casual gesture that was anything but. "She's my wife." A collective gasp, a wave of disbelief. Ilara's own heart lurched. Wife? She'd never seen this man before in her life. The lie was audacious, impossible, yet spoken with such conviction that it hung in the air, challenging anyone to dispute it. "Your wife," the sheriff stammered, his bravado deflating. "That can't be. She has no husband." "She does now," Cale stated, his gaze unwavering. "And I don't appreciate my wife being strung up like rustled cattle. Cut her down." It wasn't a request. The men on the platform hesitated, looking to the sheriff, who looked utterly lost. Cale's eyes narrowed. Now the word was a lash. One of the deputies, younger and quicker to grasp the danger, fumbled for a knife and sawed at the rope around Ilara's neck. The pressure eased. She stumbled, her legs weak, as the noose fell away. Cale nudged his horse closer, his arm extending. "Come on." Ilara stared at him, confusion warring with a desperate, instinctual urge to grasp this impossible lifeline. The faces of the townsfolk were a blur of anger and fear. This man was danger incarnate, yet he was her only escape from certain death. With a surge of will, she reached out, her trembling hand finding his strong, calloused one. He pulled her up, settling her in front of him on the saddle. The warmth of his body was a shock against the cold terror that still clung to her. He didn't spare the crowd another glance, turning his horse and riding out of Redemption as slowly and deliberately as he had ridden in, the silence he left behind thick with unspoken threats and stunned disbelief. The sun, now fully risen, cast their long shadow back towards the empty gallows. The ride away from Redemption was a blur of jolting movement and suffocating silence. Ilara clung to Cale, her cheek pressed against the rough fabric of his duster, the scent of leather, dust, and something uniquely him, wood smoke and cold iron, filling her senses. She was alive, a fact that her mind struggled to grasp. The rhythmic sway of the horse, the steady presence of the man holding her, were the only anchors in a sea of bewilderment. He offered no words, and she, caught between gratitude and profound suspicion, asked none. The town receded behind them, its judgmental silence replaced by the vast, uncaring emptiness of the plains. The sun climbed higher, baking the land, and still, they rode. Hours passed. Her muscles ached, her throat was parched, and the raw scrape on her neck where the rope had been throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. Finally, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Cale reined in the black stallion beside a small, clear stream, sheltered by a rocky outcrop. He dismounted with fluid ease, then reached up to help her down. Her legs, stiff and unused to riding, nearly buckled. He steadied her with a firm grip on her arm, his touch impersonal yet strong. "Drink," he said, his voice still that low, gravelly rumble. He gestured to the stream. Ilara knelt, cupping her hands, and drank deeply, the cool water a balm to her parched throat. She splashed some on her face, trying to wash away the grime and the lingering phantom touch of the noose. Cale, meanwhile, tended to his horse, loosening the cinch, checking its hooves. His movements were economical, precise. He was a man accustomed to solitude and self-reliance. When he was done, he turned to her. His eyes, those piercing winter sky eyes, studied her again, but this time there was a question in them. "Why were they hanging you?" Ilara straightened, her initial relief giving way to a resurgence of fear and defensiveness. "They said I killed a man. A merchant. And stole his gold." "Did you?" The question was flat, devoid of judgment, yet it demanded truth. She met his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her own. "No. I didn't kill him. I found him. He was already dead. His strongbox was open, empty. I was a stranger in town, passing through." They needed someone to blame. Her voice trembled slightly on the last words. Cale continued to watch her, his expression unreadable. "And the gold?" Ilara hesitated. This was the part that always sounded hollow, even to her own ears. I took a few coins. Just enough for food. I hadn't eaten in days. It was foolish. Desperate. But I didn't kill him. I swear it." He nodded slowly, a barely perceptible movement. Desperation makes fools of most. He gathered some dry brush and, with practiced hands, soon had a small fire crackling. The warmth was welcome as the desert air cooled rapidly with the fading light. He produced some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, offering her a share. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. That wife pronouncement still echoed in Ilara's mind. It was a ludicrous claim, a shield he had thrown over her. "But why? Why did you say that?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About me being your wife." Cale tossed a stick into the fire, watching the embers flare. Seemed the quickest way to stop a hanging. Folks are reluctant to interfere with a man and his wife, even if they suspect the marriage certificate ain't freshly inked. There was a ghost of something in his tone, not quite humor, but a dry acknowledgement of the world's rough pragmatism. "But why me?" she pressed. "You don't know me." He looked at her then, and for a moment, the hard mask seemed to soften, just a fraction. "I was passing through. Heard talk. Didn't sound like a fair trial. More like a town hungry for a quick verdict." He paused. "No one should face the rope if there's doubt." His gaze drifted to the fire. "And they weren't offering you any. So, it was a principle, then?" A strange, personal code of justice from a man who likely lived outside the law himself. It was a sliver of understanding, but it didn't lessen the precariousness of her situation. She was alive, yes, but she was now tied to a feared gunslinger, a man whose past was likely as dangerous as the future he offered. What now? She asked, the question heavy with unspoken anxieties. Now, Cale said, his eyes meeting hers again, the fleeting softness gone, replaced by that familiar stoic intensity, we ride. There'll be a posse. That sheriff won't take kindly to being made a fool of. And redemption will want its blood back. He rose, gesturing to a bedroll he'd laid out near the fire. Get some rest. We leave before first light. He didn't explain where they were going, or what his long-term intentions were. He simply stated facts. Elara, exhausted beyond measure, knew she had no choice but to comply. She lay down, pulling the rough blanket around her, the fire a small beacon of warmth in the vast, cold darkness. Sleep was slow to come, her mind replaying the morning's horror, the shocking intervention, and the unreadable face of the man who now held her life in his hands. He had saved her, but to what end? The word wife still hung in the air, a strange, unfulfilled promise or a convenient lie that bound them together in this desperate flight. They traveled for days, pushing through an unforgiving landscape that mirrored the harshness of their circumstances. Cale was relentless, his pace demanding, his senses always alert. Elara, unused to such sustained hardship, found reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her body ached, her hands blistered from gripping the saddle horn Cale had procured for her along with a scrawny mare at a remote, sun-baked trading post. It was there she saw the first real proof of Cale's reputation. The trader, a weasel-faced man with shifty eyes, had initially tried to cheat them, but a single, level look from Cale, a subtle shift of his hand towards his gun, had turned the man pale and obsequious. He'd practically given them the mare and supplies, his fear a palpable thing. Your name, it frightens people, Elara observed quietly that evening as they made camp in the lee of a sandstone butte. Cale grunted, not taking his eyes off the horizon where the sun bled into the dusty plains. Sometimes it keeps them honest. He offered no more, and Elara learned not to press. His silence was a wall, but occasionally, a word or a gesture offered a glimpse through a chink. He taught her how to make a smokeless fire, how to find water where none seemed to exist, how to listen to the desert's subtle language, the shift of the wind, the cry of a hawk, the distant sound of hooves. These were lessons in survival, and she absorbed them, knowing her life might depend on them. The wife charade was a constant, unspoken presence. At the trading post, Cale had referred to her as such once, curtly, when the trader's eyes had lingered too long. The word felt foreign on his tongue, and even more so in her ears. It was a shield, as he'd said, but it also created a strange intimacy, a fiction they both had to maintain. One night, they were forced to share a cramped, abandoned line shack to escape a sudden, violent downpour. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and their unvoiced thoughts. Cale gave her the only dry blanket, taking the dampest corner for himself. In the darkness, listening to the rain lash against the flimsy walls, Elara felt a confusing mix of gratitude and apprehension. He was her protector, her savior, yet he remained an enigma, a man whose past was a shadow that stretched long and dark behind him. They learned from a nervous drifter, encountered at a muddy waterhole, that a posse from Redemption, led by Sheriff Bodine himself, was indeed on their trail, augmented by a couple of hard-bitten bounty hunters who smelled profit. They're saying you snatched her right from the gallows, Cale, the drifter had said, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. And that she's a witch who ensnared you. Cale's only reaction was a tightening of his jaw. Let them say what they want. But Elara saw the flicker in his eyes, the added vigilance in his posture. The pursuit was real, and it was closing. That night, Cale pushed them harder, riding late into the moonlit hours, the silence between them stretched taut. Elara, bone-weary, found herself watching him, the way he moved with the horse, the set of his jaw, the constant sweep of his gaze. He was a man carved from the wilderness itself, all hard lines and resilience. She saw the faint, silvery scar that traced his left temple, disappearing into his hairline, a memento of a past he never spoke of. She wondered what burdens he carried, what ghosts haunted him in the quiet hours. He had saved her from the gallows, but what life was this? A constant flight, looking over their shoulders, bound to a man whose world was one of violence and shadows. Yet, when she stumbled from exhaustion while making camp, his hand was there, steadying her, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man whose hands were more accustomed to the cold steel of a gun. The canyons rose around them like ancient, weathered teeth, the trail narrowing, the air growing cooler. Cale chose this difficult terrain deliberately, hoping to slow their pursuers. The horses picked their way carefully over loose scree, the clatter of their hooves echoing eerily in the confined spaces. One afternoon, as they rounded a sharp bend, the distinct sound of multiple riders came from behind them, closer than they'd anticipated. "They're gaining," Cale said, his voice grim. He scanned the canyon walls. Up there he pointed to a narrow game trail that zigzagged up a steep incline. "It'll be hard going, but it might give us an advantage." The ascent was brutal. Ilara's mare struggled, and Cale, dismounting, led both horses, his own powerful black navigating the treacherous path with more assurance. Ilara scrambled behind, her lungs burning, her hands raw from gripping rocks for purchase. Twice, she slipped, and twice Cale's hand shot out, pulling her back from a dangerous fall. He didn't speak, but his presence was a bulwark against her fear. From their higher vantage point, they saw the posse enter the canyon below, Sheriff Bodine, red-faced and sweating, and at least 5 other men, their figures small but resolute. That night, they made a cold camp, no fire allowed. The stars blazed with an icy brilliance in the high-altitude sky. Huddled in her blanket, Ilara shivered, as much from tension as from the cold. "Tell me," Cale said suddenly, his voice soft in the darkness. "The truth this time. All of it. About the merchant." Ilara took a deep breath. The moment felt different. Perhaps it was the shared danger, the isolation, or the way he had protected her on the trail. "His name was Silas Blackwood," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I arrived in Redemption looking for work, anything. I'd been traveling for weeks, my money gone. Blackwood ran the general store. He offered me a meal, a place to sleep in his back room, in exchange for cleaning." She paused, the memory still sharp and humiliating. "That night, he tried to force himself on me. I fought him off. I grabbed a heavy ledger book from his desk and hit him. He fell. I just wanted to get away. I ran out. I didn't look back. When they found him the next morning, he was dead. They said his neck was broken from the fall. And the strongbox, it was open. Empty. They accused me of killing him for it." Her voice broke. "I hit him, yes. To protect myself. But I didn't kill him to rob him. I never saw that strongbox open." Cale was silent for a long moment, the only sound the sigh of the wind through the rocks. "Self-defense isn't murder," he said finally, his tone flat. "But a town like Redemption, they wouldn't see it that way. Not for a woman alone, a stranger. They said I was a harlot, trying to seduce him then rob him," Ilara whispered, shame and anger coiling in her gut. "Fear makes people cruel," Cale murmured, almost to himself. Then, he shifted, and she felt him reach out. His hand, calloused and warm, briefly touched her shoulder. It wasn't a caress, merely a fleeting contact, yet it conveyed a strange sort of understanding, perhaps even belief. "You get some sleep. I'll take first watch." He didn't say he believed her outright, but his actions spoke louder. He hadn't abandoned her. He was still here, a shield between her and the world. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Ilara thought of the name Silas Blackwood. Cale's name, she had learned, was Calen Resner. But for a moment, hearing his quiet pronouncement about self-defense, she wondered if he, too, had faced a Silas Blackwood in his past, a moment where survival had demanded a terrible choice. The wife pretense, which had once felt like a brand, now felt more like a fragile, unspoken pact, forged in shared adversity. He was still a mystery, a dangerous man, but he was also, improbably, the only person in the world who stood beside her. The pursuit intensified. Bodine's posse, driven by the sheriff's wounded pride and the lure of bounty money for the hired guns, proved tenacious. They were forced into a grueling game of cat and mouse through rugged, inhospitable country. Days blurred into a rhythm of hard riding, scarce food, and watchful nights. During one desperate scramble across a shallow, fast-flowing river, Ilara's mare lost its footing. Ilara was thrown into the churning water, the current immediately snatching at her, pulling her under. Panic clawed at her throat. Then, strong hands were on her, Cale's, hauling her sputtering and gasping towards the bank. He dragged her onto the muddy shore, his face taut with a fierce concern that momentarily stripped away his usual stoicism. "You all right?" he demanded, his voice rougher than usual. She coughed, shivering, nodding weakly. "Yes, thank you." He had risked himself, plunged into the dangerous current without hesitation. He'd saved her life again, not from a noose this time, but from the indifferent cruelty of nature. As he helped her to her feet, their eyes met, and in that moment, the carefully constructed walls between them seemed to tremble. Later, as they dried their clothes by a small, hidden fire, the shared danger, the sheer relief of survival, loosened Cale's tongue more than usual. "Used to know a river like that," he said, staring into the flames. "Took my brother." The words were stark, raw, delivered without inflection, yet they hit Ilara with the force of a blow. It was the first real piece of his past he'd ever offered, a shard of pain that explained so much about the shadows in his eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the inadequacy of the words heavy in the air. He just nodded, his profile rigid. Long time ago, but Ilara knew some pains never truly faded, they just became part of the landscape of a person. A few days later, their luck soured further. They were ambushed in a narrow pass, not by Bodine's posse, but by a different kind of threat, bandits, lean and hungry-looking men who'd likely been watching their progress. There were 3 of them, appearing suddenly from behind a rockfall, guns leveled. Well, what have we here?" Their leader, a scarred man with mean eyes, sneered. "A tough-looking fellow and his pretty lady. Hand over your horses, guns, and any valuables, and we might let you walk away." Ilara's heart hammered. Cale didn't move, didn't speak. His stillness was more menacing than any threat. "The lady stays with us for a while," one of the other bandits added, leering at Ilara. That was the spark. Cale moved with impossible speed. His gun was in his hand, barking twice before Ilara could even fully register the threat. 2 of the bandits crumpled. The leader, startled, fired widely, the shot whining past Cale's head. Cale didn't flinch, his return shot precise, hitting the leader in the shoulder. The man screamed, dropping his gun. Cale was on him in an instant, kicking the weapon away, his face a mask of cold fury. "You made a mistake," Cale bit out, his voice dangerously low. He didn't kill the man, merely disarmed him and bound his good hand. "Get out of these mountains. If I see your face again, you won't walk away." He retrieved their own guns and any useful supplies from the bandits' meager stash. Ilara watched, shaken but also awestruck. She had seen his deadliness, the lethal efficiency that was part of his legend. But she had also seen that it was ignited not by a threat to himself, but by the threat to her. He had protected her with a ferocity that was utterly primal. As they rode away, leaving the wounded bandit to his fate, Ilara found her voice. "You could have killed him." Cale glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Death's easy. Living with what you've done, or what's been done to you, that's harder." He paused. Besides, he wasn't worth the bullet. Later that night, huddled by their small fire, an uneasy quiet settled between them. Ilara knew she had been given a choice during the ambush. She could have screamed, tried to run, perhaps even used the chaos to escape Cale himself. But she hadn't. The thought hadn't even seriously crossed her mind. Instead, her first instinct had been to stay close to him, to trust in his ability to shield them. "They know we're heading north," Cale said, breaking the silence. "Bodine will be pushing hard. We need a place to rest, resupply properly. Somewhere they won't expect." He looked at her, a rare hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I know a place. But it carries its own risks." What kind of risks? Ilara asked, her trust in him solidifying despite the constant danger. Old ghosts, he said cryptically. And people who might not welcome the sight of me. He looked into the fire, his face etched with weariness and a deeper, older sorrow. But it's our best chance. Ilara nodded. Then we go there. She didn't know what ghosts awaited them, but she knew she wouldn't face them alone. The bond between them, forged in desperation and tempered by shared peril, was becoming something tangible, something that felt less like an unwilling alliance and more like a lifeline. He was no longer just her savior, he was her companion in this harsh, unforgiving world. The place Cale spoke of was a small, forgotten mining town called Whisper Creek, nestled deep in a pine-forested valley, almost swallowed by the mountains. It had an air of decay and secrets, its few inhabitants watchful and wary. As they rode down the single, rutted street, Ilara felt eyes on them from behind grimy windows and shadowed doorways. Cale's presence here was clearly significant. Some faces showed fear, others a grudging respect, and a few, open hostility. He led them to a dilapidated cabin at the edge of town, slightly apart from the others, its porch sagging, windows boarded up. It belonged to a friend, he said, his voice tight. He dismounted and, with some effort, pulled one of the boards from a window. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light that pierced the gloom within. The air inside was stale, heavy with disuse and old memories. A thick layer of dust covered everything. Cale moved through the small space with a familiarity that spoke of past occupancy. He found an old broom and began to sweep, a strange, almost domestic act for a man like him. Ilara, feeling the need to contribute, started to clear cobwebs and wipe down surfaces with a rag she found. They don't seem happy to see you, Ilara observed quietly, remembering the glares from the town. Cale paused, leaning on the broom. I left a bad taste in some mouths when I rode out of here last time. He didn't elaborate, but the lines around his eyes deepened. This friend. I couldn't help him when he needed it most. The guilt in his voice was a raw wound. They spent the next few days in Whisper Creek, a tense respite. Cale managed to trade for fresh supplies, his reputation ensuring grudging cooperation, if not welcome. He kept a low profile, mostly staying within the confines of the cabin and the small, overgrown yard. The wife charade became more pronounced here. To explain Ilara's presence, he had simply stated, "This is Ilara, my wife," to the suspicious storekeeper. The lie felt more substantial now, almost a dare. They shared the cramped cabin, the forced proximity leading to moments of unexpected awareness. She saw him without his gun belt sometimes, revealing a vulnerability he usually kept hidden. She learned the rhythm of his breathing as he slept fitfully nearby, sometimes murmuring names she didn't recognize. One evening, a woman approached the cabin. She was older, her face etched with grief but also a steely resilience. Cale stiffened when he saw her. "Martha," he said, his voice softer than Ilara had ever heard it. "Cale," she replied, her eyes, sharp and knowing, flicking to Ilara. "So, you came back. And brought trouble with you." I see. Her gaze wasn't unkind, merely observant. "She's not trouble, Martha." "She's with me," Cale said, a protective note in his voice. Martha looked at Ilara more closely. "Heard whispers from down country. A woman snatched from the gallows by a ghost rider." She turned back to Cale. "Sheriff Bodine and his pack passed through 2 days ago, asking questions. They're heading up towards the old Silver Ridge Pass. Think you'll try to cross there?" Cale nodded slowly. "Figured they might." "Your friend?" "Thomas," Martha said, her voice softening. "He wouldn't have wanted you to keep running forever, Cale. He believed in facing things." She looked at Ilara again. "This one looks like she's got some fight in her. Maybe you both do." She then produced a small sack. "Some fresh bread, and some salve for burns or scrapes. Thomas always said you were reckless." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "Be careful, Cale. Some folks here haven't forgotten Eli Stone." The name Eli Stone hung in the air after she left. Cale's face was grim. "Who is Eli Stone?" Ilara asked gently. Cale stared out the grimy window, towards the darkening pines. He was the reason I left. The reason Thomas died. He finally turned to her, his eyes filled with a pain so profound it made her ache in sympathy. Stone ran this town, owned everything, everyone. Thomas tried to stand up to him, to get fair wages for the miners. I tried to help him, but I was too violent, too quick with my gun. It escalated things. Stone's men came for Thomas one night. I was too late. His voice was flat, deadened by memory. I killed Stone and 3 of his men. But Thomas was already gone. I left a bloodbath behind me, and a town that mostly saw me as a killer, not a savior. Ilara reached out, her hand resting on his arm. You did what you thought was right. You tried to protect your friend. He looked down at her hand, then into her eyes. It wasn't enough. The self-blame was a heavy cloak he wore. The news that Bodine was heading for Silver Ridge Pass presented them with a choice. They could try to outrun him, continue their flight indefinitely, or, as Martha had hinted, they could face him. Ilara saw the conflict in Cale's eyes. He was a man used to fighting, but also a man weary of it. What do you want to do? Cale asked her, the question a genuine seeking of her counsel. It was a significant shift. Ilara thought of the constant running, the fear. She thought of the injustice that had nearly cost her her life. I don't want to run forever, Cale. Bodine will never stop. And what about my name? Am I to be a fugitive, a murderer, for the rest of my life? She looked at him, her resolve hardening. Martha said Thomas believed in facing things. Maybe she's right. A new light flickered in Cale's eyes, a spark of his old fire, but tempered now with something else, a shared purpose. Facing Bodine is one thing. Clearing your name is another. Redemption won't listen to reason easily. But if we stop Bodine, if we can somehow prove he's just after a bounty, not justice. Ilara trailed off, the plan still nebulous but the intent firm. Cale considered this. The idea of returning, of confronting the past, was daunting. But the thought of a future where Ilara wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, where she could live without the shadow of the noose, it held a strange appeal. He looked at Ilara, at the strength that had blossomed in her despite everything. She was no longer the terrified woman on the gallows. She was resilient, determined. And she trusted him. That trust was a heavy responsibility, but also a powerful motivator. All right, he said, a decision settling in his voice. We won't run to Silver Ridge. We'll let them think we are. And then, we choose our own ground. The wife who had been a lie was now his partner in this desperate gamble. The unspoken vow between them was no longer just about survival, it was about fighting for a chance at a real life, together. Cale knew these mountains, every treacherous pass, every hidden valley. Instead of heading for Silver Ridge as Bodine expected, he led Ilara on a circuitous route towards a place called Devil's Anvil, a desolate, rocky basin known for its sudden storms and defensible positions. It was a place where a few could hold off many, if they were smart and lucky. His plan was forming, to draw Bodine and his bounty hunters into a trap, separate them, and confront the sheriff himself, hoping to force an end to the pursuit, one way or another. The thought of more violence sat heavily on him, but the alternative, a lifetime of running for Ilara, was unacceptable. As they rode, Ilara practiced with a small, .32 caliber pistol Cale had acquired for her. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused from riding and work. Her aim was improving. She was no gunslinger, but she wouldn't be helpless. She learned to load it quickly, to stand firm, to control her breathing. Cale watched her, a grim pride in his eyes. She was becoming a survivor in her own right. Bodine is driven by ego, Cale explained as they scouted a narrow ravine that would serve as their primary defensive position. He won't expect us to make a stand. He'll think we're still running scared. And the bounty hunters? Ilara asked, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear she felt. They're driven by greed. More dangerous in some ways, but less predictable. We need to isolate Bodine, make him realize this isn't worth his life, or his reputation if the truth of your crime gets a wider airing. The preparation was meticulous. Cale chose their ground carefully, planning lines of fire, escape routes, and places to lay false trails. Ilara helped, her earlier fear giving way to a focused determination. They worked together, a silent understanding passing between them. The marriage that had begun as a desperate ploy on the gallows platform had evolved into a partnership forged in fire and flight. There were no tender words spoken, no declarations, but the bond was there, undeniable, woven into the fabric of their shared struggle. One evening, as they sat by a carefully concealed fire, the vast, star-dusted sky arching above them, Ilara voiced a question that had been hovering in her thoughts. "Cale, if we get through this, what happens then?" He looked at her, his face softened by the firelight. The lines of weariness and sorrow seemed less pronounced for a moment. Then, he said slowly, "You'll be free. Free to go wherever you want. To make a life for yourself, without looking over your shoulder." "And you?" she asked, her heart catching. The thought of him simply riding away, disappearing back into the shadows of his past, left an unexpected ache. His gaze drifted to the flames. "I haven't thought much beyond keeping you alive, Ilara," he paused. "My path, it's usually a solitary one." The words, though honest, stung. She had come to rely on his presence, his strength, his quiet companionship. The idea of facing the world alone again, even a world where she was free, was suddenly daunting. "You saved my life, Cale. More than once. That path, does it always have to be solitary?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. He looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something akin to longing in his eyes, quickly masked. "Some men ain't made for company, Ilara. They bring too much trouble with them." "Maybe some company isn't afraid of a little trouble," she countered softly, her gaze holding his. A tense silence enveloped them, charged with the weight of all they had endured, and all that was yet to come. The wind whispered through the rocks, a mournful sound. Cale reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was brief, featherlight, yet it sent a shiver through her. "Get some rest," he said, his voice huskier than usual. Tomorrow we face them." He didn't answer her question directly, but the way he looked at her, the lingering touch, spoke volumes. The storm was gathering, and they would meet it together. The choice to stand had been made, not just against Bodine, but for each other. Dawn broke cold and grey over Devil's Anvil. A nervous energy thrummed in the air. Cale had positioned Ilara in a sheltered spot among the rocks, overlooking the narrow entrance to the basin. She had her pistol, extra ammunition, and clear instructions: stay hidden, and only fire if absolutely necessary, or if he gave a signal. He, armed with his rifle and twin Colts, had taken a higher position, commanding a wider view. It was mid-morning when they appeared, Bodine, recognizable even at a distance by his bulk, and 4 other men, the bounty hunters looking lean and wolfish. They rode cautiously, following the false trail Cale had laid. "They're taking the bait," Cale murmured, his voice barely audible to Ilara through a prearranged series of whistles they'd practiced. The posse entered the narrowest part of the ravine. Cale fired his rifle. Not at them, but at a precariously balanced pile of rocks on the cliffside above the trail. With a deafening roar, tons of rock and debris cascaded down, completely blocking the ravine entrance, trapping Bodine and his men inside the basin. Dust billowed, horses whinnied in panic, and shouts of surprise and anger echoed off the rock walls. "Now we wait," Cale said, his eyes scanning the chaos below. It didn't take long for the bounty hunters, more experienced in guerrilla tactics, to spread out, seeking cover and trying to pinpoint Cale's position. Bodine, flustered and furious, bellowed orders that were largely ignored. The first exchange of gunfire was sharp and sporadic. Cale was a ghost, firing from one position, then moving silently to another, his shots always precise, aimed to disable or discourage, not necessarily to kill. He was trying to control the engagement, to break their cohesion. One of the bounty hunters, bolder or more foolish than the rest, tried to scale the rocks towards Cale's suspected position. Cale's rifle cracked, and the man cried out, clutching his leg, tumbling back down. Ilara watched, her heart pounding. She felt a desperate urge to help, but Cale's orders had been clear. Her role was to guard their rear and be a last resort. The standoff dragged on. The sun climbed, beating down mercilessly. Thirst and frustration began to wear on the trapped men. Bodine's bluster faded, replaced by a sullen anger. 2 more bounty hunters tried to flush Cale out, working as a pair. Cale's Colt spoke then, a rapid exchange of fire. One hunter went down hard, unmoving. The other retreated, dragging his wounded companion. The odds were slowly shifting. Suddenly, a new threat. The remaining bounty hunter, cunning and desperate, had circled wide, unnoticed, and was now attempting to come up behind Ilara's position. She heard a pebble skitter, a rustle of brush too close for comfort. Her blood ran cold. This was it. Cale was occupied with Bodine and the others below. She was on her own. She gripped her pistol, her hand slick with sweat. The man appeared, a silhouette against the brighter sky, his rifle leveling. Ilara didn't think. She reacted. She raised her pistol, aimed as Cale had taught her, and fired. The shot was loud in the confined space. The man grunted, stumbling, his own shot going wild, ricocheting off the rocks near her head. He clutched his arm, surprise and pain on his face. He hadn't expected resistance from her. Cale heard the shot, spun around, his face a mask of alarm. Seeing Ilara safe, and the bounty hunter staggering, he acted instantly. He shouted, "Bodine! Call off your dog! This ends now, or no one walks out of here." The wounded bounty hunter, seeing Cale now focused on him, and with Ilara still covering him, wisely dropped his rifle. Sheriff Bodine, alone now, his face pale, looked up at Cale's commanding position, then at the blocked ravine entrance, then at his depleted forces. The fight had gone out of him. "All right, Cale. All right. We'll talk." Cale carefully made his way down, rifle still ready, Ilara following a little behind, her pistol still in hand, though trembling slightly. The confrontation was brutal, stark. Cale faced Bodine, his eyes like ice. She was defending herself, Bodine, Cale stated, his voice cutting. Blackwood attacked her. There was no murder, no theft of significance. You wanted a quick conviction, a scapegoat. Bodine stammered, "That's not the evidence." "The evidence was circumstantial, twisted to fit your narrative," Ilara spoke up, her voice surprisingly strong. "You didn't want justice. You wanted a hanging." Cale's gaze pinned Bodine. "The bounty on her is void. You leave now, and you forget you ever saw us. You tell Redemption the case was a mistake. You tell them Ilara Vance is cleared. All the truth about your investigation and this botched pursuit will find its way to a territorial judge who might care about due process." Bodine, defeated and humiliated, looked at the unyielding gunslinger and the resolute woman beside him. He saw the bodies of the men he'd brought. He nodded curtly. "All right. We'll go." It took time to clear a narrow path through the rock slide. Bodine and the surviving, wounded bounty hunter departed, leaving their dead behind. As they disappeared from view, a heavy silence fell over Devil's Anvil, broken only by the wind. Ilara finally lowered her pistol, her body shaking with reaction. Cale went to her, gently taking the gun from her hand. He looked at the slight graze on the rock near where her head had been. His expression was grim. "You were brave," he said, his voice low. He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt. "You saved your own life today. And maybe mine." In that moment, surrounded by the debris of their battle, the air still smelling of gunpowder, their shared victory was a fragile thing, but potent. They had faced the storm and survived. Ilara leaned into his touch, a profound weariness settling over her, but also a sense of fierce, hard-won triumph. The reckoning had come, and they had met it, together. The wife he had claimed at the gallows had become his ally, his partner, a woman who stood by his side, not behind him. The aftermath of the confrontation at Devil's Anvil was a somber one. They buried the dead bounty hunters in shallow, rocky graves, a grim necessity. Cale worked with a quiet intensity, his face etched with the weariness of a man too familiar with violence and its costs. Ilara, though shaken, helped, her earlier fear replaced by a steely resolve. She had faced death and defended herself, something within her had irrevocably shifted. She was no longer merely a survivor, but a woman who had claimed her own strength. They spent another night in the desolate basin, the silence profound after the day's violence. The wounds were not just physical, the bounty hunter Ilara had shot in the arm would live, but the memory of firing her weapon at another human being would stay with her. Cale tended to a shallow graze on his own forearm, a souvenir from the exchange, his movements economical. Ilara watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and a deepening affection that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "Bodine will keep his word, you think?" she asked, breaking the silence that lay heavy between them. Cale nodded, dabbing antiseptic on his wound. "For now. Fear and shame are powerful motivators. He won't want this story getting out any more than we do. Your name should be clear, or at least, the pursuit will end." He met her eyes. "You're free, Ilara." The words, which once would have sung with promise, now carried a different weight. Free to go where? Free to do what? The life she had known before redemption seemed a distant, faded memory. The path ahead was a blank canvas, and the thought of facing it alone, without Cale's steady presence, was a prospect that filled her with an unexpected hollowness. "And you, Cale?" she asked softly, echoing her question from before, but this time with more urgency. "What will you do?" He finished tying the bandage, his gaze distant, fixed on the dying embers of their small fire. "There are always shadows to ride into." His voice was quiet, almost resigned. "Men like me, we don't often find quiet homesteads." Ilara felt a pang of despair. Was this it? After everything they had endured, would he simply vanish from her life, a ghost rider returning to his solitary existence? The wife he had claimed her as, the partner she had become, did that mean nothing beyond the immediate crisis? She rose and went to him, kneeling beside him. The firelight flickered across his rugged features, highlighting the scar at his temple, the lines of sorrow and hardship etched around his eyes. "Cale," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "that woman on the gallows, she died that day. The woman standing before you now, she's different. Stronger. And she wouldn't be, without you." He looked at her, his winter sky eyes searching hers, a profound emotion stirring in their depths, something vulnerable, something he rarely allowed to surface. "This marriage," Ilara continued, her courage growing, "it started as a lie, a desperate measure. But it doesn't feel like a lie anymore. Not to me." She took a ragged breath. "I don't want to face that freedom alone, Cale. Not if there's a chance we could face it together." The silence stretched, taut and fragile. Cale's gaze never left hers. He saw the earnestness, the hope, the raw honesty in her eyes. He, who had walked a solitary path of violence and regret for so long, who believed himself condemned to a life in the shadows, felt a stirring of something he had thought long dead, a possibility for light, for connection, for a future that wasn't steeped in blood and sorrow. Ilara, with her quiet strength and unwavering loyalty, had breached walls he thought impenetrable. She had not just survived, she had shown him that survival could mean more than just breathing. Slowly, he reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a touch that spoke more than words ever could. "Ilara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "the path ahead, it won't be easy. My past has long shadows." "I'm not afraid of shadows," she whispered, her hand covering his. "Not when I'm with you." A faint smile, rare and breathtaking, touched Cale's lips. It transformed his harsh features, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the gunslinger's stoic facade. "Redemption," he murmured, the name of the town that had nearly been her end, now taking on a new meaning. Perhaps even a man like me can find a measure of it." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "The preacher in that town asked God to have mercy on your soul. Looks like he sent me instead. And maybe, just maybe," his voice dropped to a near whisper, full of a raw, burgeoning hope, he had mercy on mine too. He didn't formally propose, not with words. He didn't need to. In the quiet understanding that passed between them, in the shared gaze that acknowledged all they had been through and all they were willing to face, the truth of their bond was sealed. The Hawaiian claimed at the gallows was now his chosen partner, his anchor, his hope for a different dawn. As the first true light of morning touched the peak surrounding Devil's Anvil, they rode out, not toward separate futures, but side by side. The land ahead was vast, uncertain, perhaps still dangerous. But they faced it together. Cale, the feared gunslinger, found his redemption not in the lonely acts of a vigilante, but in the fierce loyalty and unexpected love of the woman he had saved. And Ilara, who was to be hanged at dawn, found not just life, but a love as wild and resilient as the country itself, with the man who had made her his wife in every way that truly mattered. Their scars, visible and hidden, were testaments to their journey, and the sunrise before them promised not an easy path, but one they would walk, undeniably, together.